and just create a simple login page using Bootstrap 5 and show you some of the new features. So the website where you can find everything is v5.getbootstrap.com. So if you want to mess around with it, that's great. Maybe a small personal project or something, but I wouldn't recommend doing any large production project with it, just because there will be breaking changes in the future. Although I don't think that the jump from version 4 to 5 is going to be as significant as the jump from 3 to 4. Just like 3 to 4 wasn't as bad as 2 to 3. So I think a lot of the class names and stuff like that will stay the same. You're just going to have more available to you. So to use version 5 right now, you can of course, use a CDN, although if you do it that way, it's not very customizable, so you can either download the source files from the website, or you can install it with NPM, which is what we'll be doing in a little bit. So we'll set up a workflow to compile Sass and use variables and so on. So firstly, the documentation has been improved. There's a new look and feel with more information, especially when it comes to customization. One of the issues with Bootstrap over the years is that many sites that use Bootstrap, a lot of them seem to look the same. You can immediately identify that it uses Bootstrap. So it seems like they're giving us more guidance to customize your themes so that not every site or every app looks the same. They actually expand on version 4's theming page with more content and code snippets for building on top of Sass files. There's also a starter NPM project, which is also available as a template repo on GitHub. So better docs, more information, more customization. The color palette has also been expanded for further customization. It has many different shades of different colors. Similar to other CSS frameworks like Materialize, they've also done some work to improve color contrast. All right, so the best part of all of Bootstrap 5 is no more jQuery, no more dependency on the jQuery library. You only need the Bootstrap JavaScript file, although Popper.js is still used for tooltips, I believe. But not having to include jQuery will save on file size. It seems that they're trying to make version 5 very future friendly. They even dropped support for Internet Explorer so that they could use things like custom properties, which IE doesn't support. And this is a good thing. IE held web development back in many areas for a long, long time. So I'm glad that they dropped support for IE, glad that they dropped jQuery, and we only need the Bootstrap JavaScript file now. So as I said, one of the reasons for dropping IE is for support of CSS custom variables. Before, there were only a handful of root variables for colors and fonts and stuff like that in version 4, but now they've added a bunch for components and layout options, such as the table component. So you can see here we're using CSS custom properties. So the Bootstrap form components and the documentation for forms have also been updated. There's a dedicated area just for forms. They've redesigned the form controls. In version 4, the custom controls like radios and checks and switches, they were in addition to whatever the default browser styles. In version 5, they've gone fully custom. So all checkboxes, radios, select lists, things like that, they all have a custom appearance to unify the style and behavior across all operating systems and all browsers. So this is pretty nice. Version 5 has a new utility API. They've created a syntax in Sass to create our own utilities on the fly with the ability to modify or remove utilities that are already provided. This sort of takes from Tailwinds and some other CSS frameworks and toolkits, the ability to create your own styling utilities. And I'm going to show you how to do this, but this is an example of the with utility. So we have the utility name, the property, which is with, the class to use, which is W, and in Bootstrap we can do, W-25, 50, 75, and then these are the values. So if you do W-100, it's going to be with 100%. So you can actually go in and you can change this stuff. You probably don't want to change it directly. You want to create a new file and overwrite it, but you could modify this, and you can also create your own utilities, which I'm going to show you how to do in a little bit. So version 5 also has an enhanced grid system. They kept the bulk of the system in place because there were some issues in the version 3 to 4 upgrade. and they built on the existing grid system instead of replacing it. So some of the changes are a new sizing tier of XXL. The gutter class has been replaced to a utility, much like the margin and padding. So you can do, G dash whatever, G-1, G-2, using the spacer values as you would with margin and padding. Form layout options have also been replaced with the new grid system. Vertical spacing classes have been added, and columns are no longer positioned relative by default. So pretty subtle changes or additions, but like I said, they didn't want to have things break like you had from upgrading from 3 to 4 with the grid. So another thing that's been added is a new set of icons. So Bootstrap now has its own icon library, so you don't have to use something like Font Awesome or Material icons. You can use Bootstrap icons, which are SVGs, so they scale quickly and easily. And I will give you an example of using these. You can actually install Bootstrap icons with NPM, so we'll take a look at that as well. All right, so I think all in all, there's some good additions and changes. I haven't looked at every single component, and remember, things are still going to be added. This is only Alpha 1, but let's just jump in and set up a project and build something simple to just give you an example of setting things up. We're also going to look at the Utilities API. Okay, so like I said, if you want to start working with Bootstrap 5, you can go to v5.getbootstrap.com, and just like with version 4, you can include the CDN if you want. If you go to Get Started, you can grab the CSS file here. You have the JavaScript file here, bootstrapmin.js, and then you have Popper for tooltips, which is just a tiny tooltip library. So you can do that, but you can't really customize much that way. So you could either download the source files, or you could use NPM, which is what we're going to do. And it's important to mention that what I'm doing here with NPM, you can set up the same workflow with Bootstrap 4. It's not particular to version 5. We're just going to be using version 5, and I'll show you, for instance, the Utilities API and stuff like that. So I'm going to jump into VS Code. I just have this VS5 login page folder, and you do need Node.js installed because I'm using NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. So we want to first just init a package.json. So I'm just going to tack on -y so I don't have to go through the questions. So let me just make this a little bigger here. Okay, and then we want to install Bootstrap 5, and we can do that with npm install bootstrap. Now you can do @next, and that will give you the latest version. However, you might be watching this at a time where it's already a different version. So if you want the same version that I'm using, it's 5.0.0-alpha 1. Okay, so that will get that installed. If we look at our package.json, you can see that right here. Now you can also install the icons package with npm. So if we do npm install bootstrap-icons, that will install that. And if we look in node modules, you'll see all of these SVG icons that we can use. And if you look in our Bootstrap folder, we have the dist folder, which is our compiled CSS and also our JavaScript. So we have bootstrap.js. We also have the minified JS, which we can include in our HTML, and then we also have our Sass folder, which is what we're interested in right now. So we have the main Bootstrap SCSS file. This is what we want to include in our main Sass file, so we'll get that set up. And this just includes everything else, basically. You also have the variables file here. You can see some of the new colors, new shades, whatever. And you don't want to edit anything directly here, because if you upgrade Bootstrap, it's going to get overwritten. So you want to create your own variables file, and we'll get into that. So let's close that up and just minimize that. Now, to set up our workflow with Sass, you need a Sass compiler. What I would highly recommend is Live Sass Compiler if you're using VS Code. It's just as easy as clicking this Watch Sass button down here. Now, I do have some settings that I want to show you before I get started. So if I go to my settings and I search for Live Sass, and I actually want to go to my settings.json. So these are the settings that I use, this right here. So we have live sass compile.settings.formats, and inside this object we have the format, which is compressed, so it will be minified. When the Sass is compiled to CSS, it'll be minified. .css extension name, and then it's going to go into a folder called CSS. If you don't add a save path, it's just going to get added to your Sass folder. And then I just have false for generate source maps. Okay, so if you want to just copy these settings, you can, and if you already use this extension, I'm sure you already have your, your stuff set up. So I'm going to create a folder called SCSS, and here we're going to create a file called main.scss, and we want to use Bootstrap. So what we want to do here is just import from, we want to go up one level into node modules, and then we want Bootstrap SCSS, Bootstrap SCSS, and we'll go ahead and save this. And now what we can do is just click down here where it says watch Sass. It's going to compile into CSS. Okay, so automatically creates a CSS folder with main.css, which then includes all of Bootstrap. All right, so that's all we have to include in our HTML. So let's create our index HTML, and we'll just call this BS5 login. And then let's just add a link tag here. It's going to go to CSS/main CSS. And then I'm going to go down here, and I'll just put in H1 for now. But there's a few classes I want to add on the body, a few Bootstrap classes. One is dFlex, which will just display as flex, and then text center. And then I want it to have the secondary color as a background, so I'm going to add BG secondary. And these are all Bootstrap 4 classes as well, so nothing new. But let's save this, and then I'm going to open this with Live Server. And you can see that we have our secondary color background, we have our hello. Now I want to change the value of secondary. I don't want to use this color as the background, and this is where customization comes in. So we can go to our main.scss, and again, we don't want to edit the variables file directly. We want to just add our own here. So you could either create a new file, or you can just put them in here, a new Sass file. And let's change the variable of secondary to, I'm going to change it to just a light gray, so F4 3 times. And now if I go ahead and save that, and we go back, now you can see we have our light gray background. So this is how we can get our workflow set up to really customize Bootstrap. Now as far as the HTML goes, let's use an example of the icon. So I want to actually put an SVG icon, one of the Bootstrap icons, at the top of the login. So inside of a form, and I'm going to give this a class of form login. And let's get rid of this action. So inside this form, I'm going to put an image tag. Now these are SVG icons. You can use them in multiple ways. In fact, if you go to the docs, it'll show you, different ways you can use them. I'm just going to include it directly into the source here. So I want to go into my node modules, Bootstrap icons, and I'm going to use Bootstrap SVG. And I just want to add onto this a height of 72 and a width of 72. And then I just want to add a class of MB4, which is the margin bottom utility. Okay, so we'll save that, and we should now see that Bootstrap icon. Now there's some custom styles that I would like to add. So if you want to do that, you could put them right in the main SCSS. What I'm going to do is create a new file here called _style.scss. And the first thing that I want to do in this custom style sheet is just set the HTML body. I want to set the height to 100% because I want everything aligned in the middle, horizontally and vertically. And then for the form login, remember I gave it that class. I'm going to set the width to 100%, but set the max width to 330 pixels, and set the padding to 15 pixels. And let's set the margin auto so that it's in the middle. Okay, so if we go ahead and save that, and then we go to our main SCSS, we should be able to just import style. And since, oops, we need a semicolon. And since it's an underscore, it's not going to get compiled into, style.scss. It's just going to be imported. So now if we take a look, it's right in the middle. So for the rest of the HTML, I think what I'll do is just paste it in because I don't really want to just type a bunch of HTML in. So I'm going to grab that and paste it into index right under the image. So what we have is just an H1. We're using a couple classes here, changing the font weight to normal. It's an H1 but formatted as an H3. Label, so we use SR only because it's only visible on screen readers. Input, so we have an email input. We're using margin bottom 2. We have a password input. And notice we don't need to use the form group class, and it should still look good. Checkbox, so checkbox, and these are just standard Bootstrap classes. We're using btn primary, although I do want to change the primary color variable. But let's save this and take a look. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Now if we want to change some stuff, like I want to change the primary color of everything, not just the button, but just the primary color in general. Also, I don't want any rounded corners. I want to change that as well. So what I would do is go into my main SCSS, and let's set primary. I'm actually going to set it to the Bootstrap purple, which is 401 F7C. And then for the border radius, we want to set border radius to 0, and then we also want anything that's has -SM or -LG to be 0 as well. So if we save that, now we can see that we have sharp corners on the inputs and on the button. So anything that you want to change, you want to customize, you can just change the variable or add the variable. Now I want to show you how we can use the utilities API. So if we look in Node Modules, Bootstrap, SCSS, and we look at utilities, so we can use this API here. We need to have this utilities default, and then we use map merge, and we can add any utility we want. So I'm going to kind of mimic the padding utility. If I search for padding, you'll see that we're using the property padding. The class is P, and for the value, we're using the spacers variable, which is actually in the variables file. So if we search for spacers, and we have 1 rem as the default, and then for 1 we have that divided by 4, 2 is that divided by 2, so it just uses the spacers. Same with the margin. Now what I'd like to do is create an input padding utility, because if I use the padding utility on the input, so if I go to my email input and I do let's do P-2, that's not even going to change it because it's not bigger than the standard padding. If I go to the next one up, which is P3, it's too big. So I want to create a utility that gives me the amount of padding that I want to use on inputs. So let's get rid of that. And what we want to do is go into our main SCSS. Again, we don't want to touch the Bootstrap files. And you could either create a new file or just put it in here. And just like I showed you in the Bootstrap file, we need to set utilities default. Actually, it's exclamation default. And then we want to set utilities, and we want to use this map merge. And they give you these variables, so you can put them in variables, but I'm just going to put it right in here. So, whoops, map merge, and in here we're going to open up a set of parentheses, and then it's important that you need to put the comma and then add utilities here. So this is should be the correct syntax, and just a semicolon, and then in here we can actually add our utilities. So we want one called input padding. So this is just a name. This can be anything, and we want to set that to set of parentheses, and in here we want the property that we want to use, so just padding, and then we want the class that we want to use in our HTML. So the class I'm going to call IP, so we should be able to do like IP-1, IP-2, and so on. And then we want our values. So values we're going to put in parentheses, and we'll say like 0, 0, 1, We'll do 0.3 rem. You could use pixels. You could put whatever values you want here. And whatever, of course, whatever property you want. So let's say that, and then 3, which is going to be 0.7. Let's do 4, 0.9, and let's do 5 will be 1 rem. Okay, so those are our values. So hopefully this is clear, and you could, of course, go after this input padding, and you could put another utility if you wanted to. And you can also edit the ones that are already there. If you wanted to set like the width, you know how you have W-25, W-50, let's say you wanted to add W-30 or something like that, you could overwrite that. So now I'm going to go into my HTML, and I should be able to add IP dash, let's do -2, which I don't believe is going to actually add any padding because of the default padding. But if we do IP3, now you can see the email has more padding than the password, and this is actually what I wanted. And if I wanted that bigger, I could do IP4, and now you can see it's even bigger. And if I open up my DevTools over here and we check it out, so we have IP4, and if we look down here, we have padding 0.9 rem. Okay, so I'm just going to change that back to IP3, and I'm also going to add it onto this input, IP3, and then that gives me the padding that I want for inputs. Now, one thing I didn't do for this project is include the JavaScript. So if you want to do that, I mean, you could just grab the CDN. You could grab it from v5getbootstrap.com, or you can include it from our node modules. So if we go down here in our index.html and do script source, and we can go to node modules, bootstrap, dist, JS, and then bootstrap min.js. So that'll include that. Now, there's certain things you might need the popper library for, so you can install that with npm as well. So I think it's popper.js. Pretty sure that's it. And then if we go to node modules, let's just reload that. So popper.js, dist, I think it's this right here. Yeah, so we want to include if you need it. So script source, node modules, popper.js, dist, and then it's this UMD. I believe it's this UMD and then popper min.js. So you can include it like that as well if you need to use any, you know, JavaScript widgets or anything like that. But that's it, guys. I don't want to go too far into this. Like I said, it's in alpha 1, so once we get past that stage, once we get past alpha, I'll go ahead and do a crash course, and we'll build some kind of theme, something that's more in-depth, because things are going to get added and changed along the way. But that's it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.